There are a lot of ways to succeed at something. Most people look at what their successful peers are doing and try to emulate it. As runners, we want to train the same way, eat the same things, and even look the same way as the best in the sport because surely that's what it takes to be the best. But other runners blaze their own path. They even pride themselves on not doing things like everyone else. And when someone tells them they can't, they figure out a way to prove they can. Des Linden is this kind of athlete. Des is a two-time Olympian and became the first American woman in 33 years to win the Boston Marathon on a brutally cold and rainy Patriots Day in 2018. At age 39, she is still competing professionally and will be towing the line at Boston again this year. Welcome to The Planted Runner. I'm Coach Claire Bartholic, and my mission is to help you improve your running, your mindset, and your life with science-backed training and plant-based nutrition. Today, I'm sharing my conversation with Des Linden. You'll learn some of the stories behind her historic Boston win, how her training has changed as she's gotten older, and why she keeps showing up in the sport when some might say her best years are behind her. Des has written a memoir of her life and her incredible career, which will be out April 4th, called Choosing to Run. In it, she shares the behind the scenes of her amazing accomplishments, some of which she has never told before. We also talk about why she's always felt a little bit like somewhat of an outsider in the professional running scene, and why she wouldn't have it any other way. Before I get into the details, I want to take a moment to highlight my PR team. The PR team is a small group of runners just like you who are working with me and each other to stay consistent, stay accountable, and work towards becoming better runners every day. Not to mention, it's really fun. I'll talk more about the team later on in the episode, but if you are ready to learn more right now, head to theplantedrunner.com/group. Don't forget to listen all the way to the end for another Mental Strength Minute. Fortify your mind in 60 seconds or less. And now here's my conversation with Des Linden. Welcome to The Planted Runner, Des.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So I want to ask you this question. So what is harder, winning the Boston Marathon or writing a book?
That's a great question. And I would go with writing the book because I'm not a professional writer. Hired some help for sure. When it comes to marathoning, I know how to go straight forward and it's right foot, left foot, repeat. So yeah, it's a little more dialed into what I know.
What's it like writing a memoir and you're still in your 30s? You know, memoirs are for people who are like really old.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 39, so I'm going to be rolling over soon. So there's enough content there, I think. And, the Boston victory added an element to my life that I think made a memoir something that was possible and maybe interesting. And I think we were really tight on the word count, and we had the smaller size book because we didn't have enough pages to hit that 300 mark. So I think that's appropriate for my age.
Yeah, perfect. No, I have my paper copy right here. So it's not nice. The real one, but yeah, thank you to your publisher for sending that out. I really appreciate that. So, in the book, you weave in the story of the Boston Marathon win in 2018, but, every other chapter or so is telling the history, kind of behind the scenes, a little bit of the soap opera details of some of the, chapters of your life, which I thought was really interesting. I feel like I've followed you for a while, so I felt like, there's nothing in here that I don't already know. And there were some surprises. So why did you feel like it was important to share some of those details?
Yeah, I think that was the point of writing the memoir. If I didn't have an additional story or something to extend on, then, I could go on podcasts and do speaking engagements. And, I think everyone believes they know the story of 2018 win, but there was just so much more behind it going on that I wanted to share it. And so yeah, I think it's just another look into my life, and hopefully there's lessons in there that can apply to everyone's life and industry and situation. So they see themselves in those stories, take the lessons that I've learned, and maybe not have to go through as many ups and downs in their own process.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd like to get into some training philosophy. So you trained for a really long time with the Hansons, and they have their own sort of signature marathon training style. And a lot of it revolves around fatigue. So pre-fatigue, cumulative fatigue, lots and lots of fatigue, which, you really seem to thrive under, obviously. But you mentioned in the book at a point, it wasn't the right style for you. Can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, there's certain things at a young age you recover quicker and you're adapting to a lot more. And those stresses are productive, and, you don't bury yourself. But I think you always do have to be adapting and changing your training. Otherwise, the stimulus just becomes lost. You don't have those benefits anymore. And so I think I went a little too deep in my career with that same training philosophy. We made mild tweaks, but really marathon segments were pretty predictable. And so now I'm working with a different coach who happened to be my college coach, Walt Drenth, and he kind of forces me to learn a lot of this stuff. And we've had a conversation recently where we're like, I trust you. I trust the training that you're giving me. And he's like, no, it's actually a team process here, and we have to kind of come to a consensus together and talk about recovery and adaptability and all that.
Yeah. So, I think what you just said, I trust you, coach. As a coach myself, that is like the scariest sound, the scariest words that I can hear, because it's like, wait a second. Yes, that's great that you trust me, but it's a two-way street. An athlete really needs to learn how to make his or her own decisions. They need to really communicate with the coach. They really need to say, hey, this is working, this is not working. But then on the other hand, you hire a coach for a reason, because you want them to tell you what to do. So, what's the relationship like now for you?
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. And it's my college coach, so we have a great history. He actually lives 6 miles down the road from me in Charlevoix, which is just coincidence, but he's very close by, and we get together with him and his wife, Kara, and have dinner on occasion. We talk running, and then we spend a lot of time not talking about running, which is really awesome. And then the coaching side is sort of a separate side where we sit down and he kind of has the big plan for a build-up laid out, but everything's in pencil. And, I think one thing that we've been trying to get better at throughout these years is communicating, to be honest, where it's like, I'm going to give you the work, but let's talk after each session and decide if we need to adjust, if we need to push things around, and not just looking at the schedule as in stone and I have to, get everything done or else this thing isn't working. So it's much more flexible. It's much more individualized, personalized, and taking into account a lot of things too, where it's like, I'm 39 and there's a lot different things that I need at this point than when I was, 26. So that all comes into play.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to get into that. What are those things that you've noticed that you have to do differently?
Yeah, it's I think it's less volume and, more intensity and being more intentional in the sessions that I'm doing. Focusing a lot more on speed, even if it's for shorter bouts, and just touching on paces that are uncomfortable, and then making sure recovery is a part of it, because that's when the adaptation happens, and then start all over when you're ready to run hard again.
Yeah. So, a lot actually has changed in the distance running world as far as training, or maybe everything old is new again. I don't really know. But, you hear about the Norwegian model, they're training at lactate threshold all the time for 1,500 races, which seems bizarre. And then, Kira D'Amato talks about training like a 5K runner for the marathon. Doing a lot of things that are not bread and butter marathon type things. So do you feel like you're shifting in those kind of ways too?
I think so, to a degree. I think the event has changed significantly with the introduction of the new shoes, which is kind of silly, but it's just a much faster race. And, I think you hear a lot of people talk about the shoes and say, well, my legs just aren't as fatigued. So you have to be able to run faster, and, they figure out how to factor those in. But personally, I just, I think the thing that is going to make me stay where I'm at or get a little bit better is, running paces that are uncomfortable. I'm really good at locking into marathon pace for a long time, but there's no kind of change of pace in there. So that's the stuff I need to work on and make that marathon pace feel a little more comfortable again.
I did notice that you mentioned the very classic Hanson's marathon workout, the 2x6 in your book. I give this to a lot of my marathon runners. So I'd love for you to talk about that first of all, and then ask, are you still doing it?
Yeah, it's definitely a staple workout in the program. I think, it's kind of funny is what makes it special is it's at the end of about 120-mile week. So we would do a simulator, 16 miles is pretty typical, and then have a 20 miler, and then maybe like a 3x3. And at the end of the sequence is 2x6 miles. With 10 minutes, like a 10-minute rest in between there. And so it's a bulky day, and in its own right, it's a tough workout, but it's really the placement of that workout at the end of the segment that makes in that program such a tough thing to do. And we would do it at 5 seconds faster than marathon pace throughout. So yeah, I mean, to me, that was kind of a signature one. If I could get it done, I knew I was ready to go. And by the end of that stretch, I was also very ready to taper. And, when you got your fresh legs, it's like, okay, I got a chance to do this for 26.2. And now it's very different. I think I've done 2x5 with my coach. And we would do a lot of it at marathon pace, but then hope to have legs to run, 10 seconds faster than marathon pace by the end of it. And the, things around it are not as bulky either. So it's just a different workout, but it sort of looks the same on paper, which is kind of funny.
Yeah. No, it's a classic. I love it. I always felt like if I or my athletes nailed that one, I'm just like, yes, gold star, get really excited about that one. And another thing that you talked about in the book is that you really don't do really long runs. You have a ton of mileage compared to a recreational runner weekly, but you're not going out there and running, 22, 25, 26 miles in training. And some elites actually do that. And I would love to hear why that's important to you.
Yeah, that philosophy really came from the Hansons as well, where it was like there's so much bulk the rest of the week that the idea was that it's 20 miles, but it's the last 20 miles of the marathon. So, the week really adds that first 6 miles on into your legs before you even get started, and then you're covering the rest of the distance. And it's a philosophy, I think, it worked for a really long time. And now I've gone up to 26 as I was getting ready for a 50K. But for the marathon, it's still, I feel like lifetime miles on my leg. It's the same type of thing where I'm like, I probably only need 20 miles.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing I was curious about, when you won Boston, obviously super dramatic in the rain, just a horrible, horrible day, and you crossed the line by yourself. It was just amazing. You could have said, yep, I've done it. This is it. What's driving you now? Why do you keep showing up, to use one of your phrases?
Yeah. I really enjoy it. I think I've learned how to love the act of running and like the activity of running. That wasn't something that really came natural to me. I had to go and find that. And I talk about that a lot in the book, where it's just like reinventing that I'm a runner and reminding myself that it's part of my lifestyle and balancing it with the other things that I want to do. But I've always loved competing. That was the thing that really got me hooked on the sport. And I'm still able to do that. And I think, I have to, again, adapt and reinvent to a degree. And, maybe it's longer distances, maybe it's chasing masters titles or records. Maybe it's different terrains, but I enjoy competing and finding out where my limits are and if I can push them, and just getting to those tough moments and seeing how I respond to adversity.
Mm-hmm. And, you have some examples over on the men's side of masters runners going to the Olympics. So, it's about time we see it on the women's side too, right?
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, why Boston? There's lots of marathons out there. It's not like you're from Boston. What makes Boston so magical for you? I want to tell you about a unique opportunity for you to get stronger, faster, and stay motivated to hit all your running and nutrition goals this year, and that is to join the PR team. I started it last fall, and I have to tell you, it's even better than I imagined. Each member of the team gets a custom training plan made by me for you based on your unique fitness, goals, and lifestyle. Everything you need to crush your running dreams is included, such as strength training, recovery, and even cross training if you want it. I include weekly mental strength training as well as tips and nutrition guides. But here's where it gets really cool. The group has its own page in the app where we share workouts, ask training questions, and get feedback from me and the other teammates. And each week I create an exclusive private podcast just for the team based on the questions I get and what I see in their training each week. And I usually end up sharing behind the scenes and exclusive sneak peeks with the team that I don't share anywhere else. So instead of joining a Facebook group or sitting through another Zoom call, you get to listen to tailored advice on the run, and you don't have to do all of this alone. So if you are ready to take your running to the next level and join an amazing team of runners, head to theplantedrunner.com/group and join us today. It's more affordable than you think, and I can't wait to have you.
It was definitely the history. When I got out there for my first marathon, which I was super fortunate, it was the U.S. Championship in 2007. So I didn't have to get a BQ. I was able to debut there. And just being on the course, we went out and did a couple course tours and, you get the background of the course and some of the landmarks and what it's going to be like on race day and how different it is. And, we got in 2007, it was the nor'easter where they had flirted with the idea of canceling it, and then it wasn't as bad as expected. But I was out there and was like, this is amazing. The crowds are awesome. This is like such a cool experience. And like having these, other races, kind of knowing where they took place and the breaks were made and all of these different things. And then I was talking to folks after and they're like, oh, it was terrible this year. Like nobody was out. And it's like, are you kidding me? This was an incredible experience. So when I was able to go back in 11, like that energy and enthusiasm for event just grew and kind of snowballed throughout my career. But really, if I had to sum it up, it's the history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you have a podcast that's with Kara Goucher right now that I've been binging. And, you talked about at one point, the 2011 race where you came in second. And, you said at one point, had you won, you might have quit at that point. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it just would have felt easy. I would have been like, well, of course, like this was pretty easy. I've won one, and now like let's go on to the next thing. And what's the Boston Marathon champion equivalent of, I don't know, business life or being a psychologist or whatever I wanted to do next. It just would have felt like that was enough, and now it's time to find the next challenge, because it wouldn't have felt like a challenge if it came that easy, to be honest.
Well, it certainly hasn't come easy. You had to wait to the worst weather possible in 2018 to make it happen, but you did. So what is the podcast like? What is doing the podcast with Kara? Obviously she is, talented in her own right, and you have a lot of similarities when it comes to your histories. But, podcasting is not necessarily something that you guys just, do, for a profession. So what made you guys decide to jump in together on this?
Yeah, I think it happened over a Twitter conversation where we were kind of debating, the ins and outs of shoe tech and some of the pluses and some of the cons to it. And it was this Twitter conversation, and we were just being very genuine, not necessarily trying to pat sponsors on the back or say everything is great in this scenario. And we felt like we had enough to say, and also that we weren't afraid to say it. Although a lot of people in the space right now, when they're really in competition, it's hard to really voice what you want to. And in that, it was kind of like there was an interest from a lot of people in what we were saying. And also we kind of identified that we have so much experience, we have a voice, and, this is just another way to have a platform. And it was kind of fun because I've competed against Kara. We came from two very different groups, and I think, just had different perceptions of each other throughout the years. And so it's been great to actually get to know her and not what she was painted out to be, or, just what we were told she was. And it's been really fun that we're actually quite similar, because how it was portrayed was always that we were very polar opposites and different. So.
Right. I mean, we assume that y'all are just friends, that you've known each other for years, but it's really sort of interesting, like, these people don't really even know each other. They're getting to know each other in front of us. And that's kind of the magic of it. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah. So, one thing you talked about that I want to get into is that you never really got into the trap of disordered eating like so many of your peers. It's really hard not to. Like, even somebody who is so strong and sure of herself, can fall into the trap of disordered eating when everybody around you seems to be doing it. And you got to wear those tiny little bathing suits to go compete in, So how did you escape that?
I feel like I've always been really comfortable in my own skin. And part of what makes me me is not caring what other people think and not kind of doing something because everyone else is doing it. I think I've always taken a lot of pride in finding my own way. And, I think in the first chapter, the early chapters, this outsider mentality, I'm very comfortable with it. And I feel like I was always kind of an outsider. So if this made me an outsider, that was kind of my place anyhow. And, I always I feel like I had a really good perspective on that this is a sport. Like, it's supposed to be fun. And a lot of that came from my relationship with my father. And also, I also remember a lot of conversations with my father that, it was like, if you don't fuel, if you don't eat, you just don't get to play. And it was sort of something that he hung over my head, which could go a lot of different ways. But for me, it became very practical. Like, you have to put fuel into the machine if you want to get it to go. And that always stuck with me. So yeah, I definitely can see how it can be a challenging thing for a lot of people. And I understand that lightness is rewarded in a weird way in our sport, but from a long-term perspective, no one has shortcutted evolutionary biology just yet. Like, I haven't seen it work out right. Long-term for anyone really. It like comes back and then you have to solve it and then you can move forward again. So, a marathon lesson when you're really young is, let's just have some patience here, and that's going to give you the longevity. So I'm very fortunate that I was able to kind of sidestep that.
Yeah, absolutely. You still, though, have to obviously pay attention to what you eat. You have to pay attention to make sure that you're eating enough and, that it matches your training. You're obviously at the highest level. So I'm sure you've worked with professionals to make sure that you're eating correctly. So how do you actually do it? Or are you just a lot more casual with it?
I'm probably the most casual you're going to find. It's just like, if you feel yourself getting hungry, fill up the tank. I think when I'm really in heavy training, it's so much more important to make sure I have something versus the right thing. It's always try to have the right food first. And so you stock your fridge accordingly and hope to have, whole foods and less bags and boxes and more real food. So that's sort of large scale philosophy. And then, when your real life hits you and you're traveling or something pops up, I traveled to Brooks for an event recently, and there was testing that I had to do. But part of the thing was that I couldn't eat up to 2 hours before the testing. So my testing was at 8 and I was on East Coast time. I got up at 5 a.m. I'm like, nothing is open. But this is kind of me to a T. I wasn't going to starve because I was really hungry. And when I'm hungry, I'm moody and cranky. So I'm rifling through my bag. And the only thing I had was a Snickers bar. So it's like, well, it's a Snickers bar for breakfast. And that's bizarre and that's worst case scenario. But like, I would rather have the wrong thing, but, you know, feel like I have something in my stomach and that I can function. So not very dialed, not very scientific, but gets it done for me.
Hey, that's okay. That's okay. So what is your pre-race breakfast?
I usually have a bagel with peanut butter and then like a side of white rice. White rice is always kind of the go-to the night before. Some pasta. It's just like a really simple carb, easily digestible, and hasn't caused me any GI distress yet. So knock on wood.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. That's great. So at one point in your story, you're talking about your race bottles. So you're mixing your race bottles, you're coloring them a certain way for each station. You know, there's a whole science to that. So, and then of course you missed some of the bottles, and you know, it's a great read. Everybody should read about this story. But so, what are you planning on doing differently this year at Boston?
Yeah, I think it really boiled down to like my headspace prior to the race just wasn't focused on racing. It was focused on so many other things. And so I sort of just made them and then hand them off to my agent's wife, who was like, I'll take them down to check them in for you. And like in my mind, they were in the order they were always in, but she didn't know that order because why would she? So it's just doing it myself and making sure that I have that order lined out properly, because that's like what I was anticipating. Like, well, this is how they always are. Why wouldn't they be like that? But the night before, I was not doing things the way I had always done them. So. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And of course, so now we got to ask you, what's your post-race meal? What do you eat afterwards?
Yeah, so I do the protein recovery shake, you know, just as close as I can to the finish where your stomach's not like rebelling. But I use a power bar shake that's like a recovery mix. And that's like the first thing because solids don't sound great right away. And then go and have the food for fun. It's my agent and I used to do these power bar panels for a long time, and it was food for function beforehand, food for fun afterwards. And so the fun food is, I think, usually a burger with cheese, jalapenos, all the things that you couldn't have before, and a beer for sure.
Yeah, maybe some champagne out of a shoe, maybe.
That's right.
That's right. So what advice would you give somebody who's running Boston for the first time?
Oh, goodness. There's so much to learn. I feel like, one, you should read the book because there's a lot of course tips in there that might help you out. Two, practice some downhills when you're training. I think a lot of people think of the Newton Hills as, I got to get ready for the Newton Hills or these big climbs, and that's the challenging part. It's true, but it's a lot of the downhills that really make the last 10K so hard, because you come out of the Newton Hills, which almost feel like a relief for your quad because you're going up instead of down, and then you go back downhill at that last section. And if you've gone out too hard or if you haven't trained your quads for what that's going to feel like, that downhill doesn't feel that nice. It actually is you're just bracing yourself for every biting step. So get some downhills in there, and I think don't go out too hard. There's just an energy to Boston that makes people think it's their day, and the downhills sort of pull you early, so you feel like, oh, this is so easy. I'm having my moment. This is when I knock 30 minutes off of my time or something outrageous, but
right.
Give yourself a pace governing chip so that you're not going too hard those first early miles.
Yeah. Any other advice for toughening up those quads? Because downhill training on downhill is great, but it's also very hard and you can't do a ton of it because you're going to hurt yourself. Yeah. So any other advice for really, really toughening them up?
Yeah. I mean, I think you got to sprinkle that in and, make sure that's not too aggressive. And for me, it's always like the early parts of the training cycle, and then you kind of taper them out. And that's, you have them sort of prepared for the rest of the build and like kind of as they would be for the rest of the race. I'm sure there's like gym work that's great. And another thing with Boston that's really interesting is they've done muscle biopsies afterwards. And I believe the hamstrings, although the quads really hurt, the hamstrings are the ones that are more damaged. So working on your hamstrings in the gym is also really a bright way to kind of attack that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And what about the weather? Like, how do you prepare for the weather? So, obviously you could get a crap day, you could get a hot day, you get a sunny day. There's lots of points on the Boston course where there's absolutely no shade and it's miserable if it's hot. So, how do you prepare for that, if you're training in a hot climate, training in a cold climate, a lot of people show up and they're just like completely unprepared for really bad weather.
Yeah, I think for the cold weather, it's the right gear and knowing what that's going to be. For that really windy, wet day, I think a lot of people picked like waterproof jackets, but then you start heating up and you're like, well, I don't need this anymore. And you throw it off too early, but you still really need it. So it's like finding the right piece that's going to let you be comfortable out there and keep you at the right temperature all day. So there's equipment on the cold side. On the hot side, I think a lot of the problems people run into is they're training in cold climates. It's a winter training segment, and then spring you can get a 65-degree day in Boston, but when you've been training in 30 or 15 or whatever it may be, that 65 feels like 85. So 10 days out or so, I think reminding your body how to sweat is pretty important. And you can do that with just a few extra layers, maybe a sauna, something like that. And just, it's getting that body dialed into that sweating process again. And that's how we self-regulate our temperature out there. So that'll help a ton. And it doesn't have to be crazy. It's like a 10-day thing where you just sort of add it in. And then obviously amp up hydration with that too, if you're losing a lot of sweat.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So in Boston this year, what will you define as success for you? When you cross the finish line this April, what will you say to yourself, yeah, that was a good day? What would it take?
I think if I'm just gassed, I think it's hard to know what the placement will look like or, where I'm going to be competing. But maximizing my fitness and training is obviously the first step, getting to the line healthy. And then just knowing like every step I've exerted myself right where I needed to. And I never threw in the towel or said like lost the battle of the bargaining where you go like, just going to back off for a little bit here. No one's really going to know. Just being able to answer that honestly at the end and say, yeah, no, I was on the gas the whole time. I left it all out there. That would be a successful day for me.
Awesome. Well, I think that is a perfect way to wrap this up. I know you've got lots of these things to do, so I want to be respectful of your time. So the book, Choosing to Run, comes out April 4th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And then Boston a couple weeks later. Awesome. Well, congratulations on the book. I've written one myself, and they are harder than marathons for sure. I'm one and done, I think. How about you? You got another one in you?
Good question. Got to go do some more life things, some more fun, cool stuff, and then we'll see if it's interesting enough to put on a page.
Awesome. Well, Des Linden, this has been an absolute honor and a treat. Thank you so much for being generous with your time, and best of luck with both the book and Boston and, of course, the podcast and everything else that you're doing.
Thank you so much.
And now it's time for the Mental Strength Minute. Fortify your mind in 60 seconds or less. Today's topic is keep showing up. A phrase made famous by Des Linden, this simply means consistency is the most important part of achieving anything. You will not have a great day every single day or even most of the days, but the more often you show up and give it a try, the better you will become. So if it's too hot or too cold or too rainy for your run, dress appropriately and go run anyway. There will be days when you don't feel like running, but unless you are sick or too sore or injured, a run will feel better once you've done it, even if it's slower or shorter than you had originally planned. Because your training is never about just one run. It's about all the runs that you showed up for. Thank you for listening to The Planted Runner. Don't forget, you can win a copy of my book for leaving an Apple Podcast review. So be sure to write yours right after your run today. Reviews are the #1 way to boost this show's reach, and it's a great way to tell me what you'd like to hear next because I read every single one. Have a great run today.